is designed to give you a quick overview of a sine and cosine graph, describing what it looks like, and then going into the parts of a sine and cosine graph. So first off, I would highly encourage you to do the unit circle investigation so that you can see the connections between the unit circle and the graph of sine and cosine. Um, when you go to that investigation, notice how when you go up, it's actually graphing the y value or the x value, or in essence, the sine and cosine of that degree at a given time, and you can kind of see the connections. But here's what you're going to end up seeing. You're going to see this sine graph, which is you can kind of notice from even the previous unit we did where we looked at parent functions. Sine graph starts at 0 and then makes its curves, while cosine starts at 1 and then makes its curve. So those are the basic look of a sine and cosine graph. Now let's kind of go into some more detail. You can go ahead and pause the video at this point so that you can write down the basic equation of a trigonomic function and its basic parts. Where does those connect? So although I'm not going to ask you max and min on the test, I do always want you to remember that max is the maximum height of a graph and minimum is the minimum height. What will be a big part of the test is amplitude and period. Amplitude is basically the height, while the period is the rotation between. But you'll get a chance to actually write this down. So just please know that when you pause the video in a moment, you will want to make sure that you connect amplitude with the A inside of the equation, and B is connected to the period inside of the equation. So go ahead and pause and create this graph and get ready to take some more notes. Okay, now that you've unpaused, here's some more details to write. Of course, here's maximum and minimum written out for you. Amplitude, I like to say it's the distance between the midline and the max or the min height, because I want you to recognize that this line, this pink line, is also the midline, which I'll give you more information about midline in a second. And that the period is the distance between any two set of repeating points. So starting here and ending here is the period. And the biggest part is the period can be found by using 2 pi divided by the b value. And the b value is always the number in front of the x. So in this instance, this is just a basic sine graph. So the b value is 1. So that's why the answer is 2 pi. Again, pause the video to write these notes about these these two specific things. Max and min, you do not have to write a note on. Just make sure you write a note on amplitude and period. Okay, now for your final sort of big note writing. So, and you can look at your book, page 260 through 262, to get this information from your McGraw-Hill textbook. So don't feel like you have to pause the video. You can get it there. But frequency is the number of cycles in an interval, the number of times that the sine or cosine graph occurs from one sort of set. So to find the frequency, you take the b value in the equation, you divide it by 2 pi. Phase shift is when it shifts left and right. It's what causes the graph to move left and right. And to find out how much it moved, you take the opposite or negative of the c value divided by the absolute value of b. And then finally, the midline, I like to think of it as the line that cuts the graph in half. It doesn't always land on the x-axis, because if there's a vertical shift, meaning it went up or went down, the midline moves with that shift. So that's why the midline and the vertical shift are the same value. But a midline is a line, so it's important for you to write y equals the d value, whereas a vertical shift is just telling you how much, so there is no y equals necessary. Again, check out your book, and I highly recommend, because this is just a quick statement, that you do the investigations below, or investigations from your TI-Nspire calculator that Mrs. Northard or that I send to you, and actually go through to help you understand why the frequency is this equation and why the phase shift is this equation. So that those investigations really help you with that. Now let's look at an example problem. So I always have my sine or my formula to kind of help me figure out all of these different parts. And that's the biggest thing that I'm wanting you to know how to do is figure out amplitude, vertical shift, period, phase shift, frequency, and midline. So amplitude is really easy because it's just the absolute value of the A, because I'm really just talking about how high it is. So the A is always in front of the sine or cosine. So in this instance, my amplitude is 1/2. Again, the vertical shift is where the D is, and the D is always just added or subtracted apart from the equation. So if you can kind of think of this as this is all together, and then this is off to itself. So think of this as being all together, and this being by itself. So my vertical shift is 2, and my vertical shift and midline match, so that is y equals 2. And then next is the period, which is the big piece that I'm going to ask you to know even more on any quizzes or tests. So the period is 2 pi divided by the b value. Now the b value is always connected with the x, and sometimes it's a fraction. So in this particular instance, it is pi, a degree over 3. You can also think of this as x instead of that. So my real b value is 1/3. And my c value is pi over 2. Okay, so for the period, I do 2 pi over 1/3. When you put that in your calculator, remember you're just doing 2 over 1/3 in your calculator, you'll get 6 pi. And then if you do phase shift, the C over, again, C is pi over 2, over the B value, which is 1/3, and of course you change the sign to negative because that's what's in front of it, and it didn't have a negative, so I'm not turning it to a positive. When I put that in my calculator, I'll get 3/2 pi negative. So it's actually going to move, this is what it's meaning. The original graph is moving in a negative direction, 3/2 over pi. And then lastly is my frequency, and that is 1/3 over 2 pi. And again, when I put this in my calculator, I ignore the pi, I will get 2/3 pi as my frequency. Now, your graphing calculator can graph for you, and you just actually repeat the graph on side of the paper. Right now, I'm not expecting you to graph since it's just a calculator move. But do know that your calculator can do it, as well as there's a free online calculator if you don't have the TI-Nspire personally, and it's called Desmos. And let me show you Desmos and this graph inside of it. So it's just desmos.com. You literally just click here, and it will have your keypad here, as well as your functions, your sine, cosine, tangent there. So I did 1/2 sine, parentheses, x divided by 3, plus pi divided by 2, close the parentheses, plus 2, and now it graphed it for me. So you can also use an online device. This is also available as an app if you have a smartphone. It's a couple of ways for you to be able to graph. Okay, feel free to rewind this. If I seem like I went too fast, you can rewind and kind of re-listen. But go ahead and try this problem on your own. Okay, hopefully you saw that the amplitude, again, is a number in front, so it is a 2. And you saw that the vertical shift is a -2, which means my midline is y equals 2, -2. The period is 2 pi divided by the b, and remember the b is the one in front of the x, or in this case theta, which is the degree. So it b equals 2. So it's 2 here, which means that it's pi as my period. And then the phase shift means c, so my c is -1/4. So I'm going to put it, and my b again is 2. So I'm going to put it in my formula, my formula over here, and I'll have 1/4 with a negative, and then the b is 2. And of course, I have the negative out here, which means my full answer is going to be positive. And when I put this in my calculator, I get 1/2. So my phase shift is 1/2. And then, pi, sorry, left off the pi. And my frequency is b over 2 pi, which is just 1 over pi. And I'm done. You should be able to do the practice problems. If you need any help, again, I am available. Or you can also rewatch this video for further assistance.